Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the fact that stretch position exercises, in other words, exercises that let us get a stretch reflex or a myotatic reflex, oftentimes have superior mechanical tension, which is useful for hypertrophy purposes, to lifts that do not. Now, when I make a statement like that, that doesn't mean that everything you do needs to have a stretch reflex, right? It's just another tool in the toolbox. And in the grand scheme of things, we are probably going to do multiple exercises for every muscle group anyways, right? And what I would generally say is that we probably just want to try to make sure that we have a stretch position movement somewhere in there for each exercise. In other words, we don't have to focus around it entirely. And there's a bad habit that people have that when I say something is a good tool or a great tool to use, that I must mean 100% of the time and that everything else is crap. Because people seem to think that way for some reason, and that is absolutely not what I'm saying. And you'll see me demonstrating mostly upper body stuff here, a lot of dumbbell stuff, because a lot of dumbbells allow us to get into a stretch position. That is one of the biggest benefits to dumbbells. They're not required to do this. There are other tools that will oftentimes do the same thing. But you'll see me doing dumbbell chest presses. You'll see me doing dumbbell rows. Right? You'll see me doing dumbbell rows. Incline curls. You'll see me doing some laying dumbbell extensions. Well, what these things all have in common is that they allow for a deep stretch on the muscle at the bottom. And when we talk about mechanical tension, people usually attribute that to meaning weight, because there is truth to that. If you do a specific exercise and you increase the weight 10% over time while using the same range of motion, you've increased the mechanical tension on the muscle 10%, right? And you've done so at every joint angle, including the most taxing ones. But a lot of times when we're thinking in terms of mechanical tension on a muscle, the most tension is usually put in a position to where that muscle is at its weakest point. So what do we mean? For example, the pectorals are put into their deepest stretch when we get at the very, very bottom. And if we have an exercise that allows us to go deeper, then what happens? We put more mechanical tension on there with the same amount of weight because we're at a mechanical disadvantage at the very bottom. Now, of course, I realize as I'm watching this footage, I threw these dumbbell rows in, and I'm not actually getting a particularly good stretch position on these, so they were maybe a bad choice to throw in. But, they're there. They're in the footage. Deal with it. All right, the same thing we could look at with the incline curl. You'll see me doing it, and you'll notice that we put a deep stretch on the bicep at the bottom. All right, the bicep is at a mechanical disadvantage there, especially if our arms are behind us. Why? Because not only have we put the bicep down to the point where it has the most trouble getting tension, we're also putting a deeper stretch on the muscle. And we're putting a deeper stretch on the muscle. Now, ironically, the incline curl doesn't always give us the best mechanical tension there, right? Because there may not be the most actual mechanical force against the bicep always at the bottom, depending on what we're doing. But the incline curl is still a good example of this, and so are the dumbbell extensions you'll see, and definitely the chest stuff. So what are we getting out of this? Well, what we're getting out of it is that we are also putting muscles into a position to where their moment arms change. In other words, even with a lighter weight, we may be putting that muscle into a disadvantaged position to where more mechanical tension is applied to the muscle, right? How much stress is being applied to that muscle? How much physical mechanical load? And because we're dealing with different positions in a movement, the pec is really easy for people to understand. You watch the pectoral, what happens? We get down to the bottom and look at the angles involved. Look at the angles involved. We're putting the most tension on that muscle at the bottom. And that's not true with every exercise or with every muscle. So by us going into that stretch position, we are putting more mechanical loading on the muscle. And if we have an exercise that creates a stretch reflex at the point where we get the most loading, which the quads we can do that for, we can do things for hamstrings. Perfect example for hamstrings, Romanian deadlifts. Arguably some types of good mornings, because there's more than one type of good morning. A lot of variations, which I use a lot of variations, program a lot of variations. So it's not always guaranteed to happen on a good morning. It's going to depend on what version. But with a Romanian deadlift, it's pretty consistent, isn't it? In other words, when we put that stretch on the muscle, when it's stretched on the Romanian deadlift, we can get both a stretch reflex, and we're coming out of a stretch reflex at a position to where the muscle is most mechanically disadvantaged. All right, it's that combination that really gives us a fantastic hypertrophic response. Now, when you say that, people say, but didn't you say that fatigue is all that's required? And that's true. We can get nearly maximum muscle growth by just doing enough work sets close to failure. But if we're talking about getting all the available muscle fibers, right, not just trying to get 95, 98% of our growth, if we're pursuing 100% of our growth, because of the mechanical tension nature of exercises that allow us to get a stretch reflex from the mechanical disadvantaged position of the muscle, which again, a dumbbell chest press with a McDonald bar, right? Romanian deadlifts. A lot of these movements put us in that position. It allows us some access to muscle fibers in a way that we might not hit with other movements. Now, again, when you say that, people will say, oh, so that must mean we should do it on everything. It'll give us the best growth. No. As long as you do it on one exercise, you're getting that advantage. You can do other stuff. In other words, you could do barbell flat benching with a pause, get a very, very large amount of pectoral growth, right, and front delt. We could argue about tricep. I don't think so much tricep. Interior deltoid and pectoral, though, you bet. But when we add on top of that dumbbell stretch position movement, we are making sure that we are getting some muscle fibers that might not be getting fully worked with the other thing. So it's not that all of our lifting, even for maximizing hypertrophy, which we need for strength, right, particularly some of the joint angle benefits, right, getting really good at strong and hypertrophying the stretch position on the bench can really help you get out of the bottom of a raw bench easier. So it has definite strength applications. And we need to think in those terms for strength. We need to be thinking like that. But if we are adding one exercise in that does it, we are ensuring that we're getting a larger diversity of training stimulus to make sure that we are recruiting all the available muscle fibers, enough so that we create enough fatigue that we get a training response. So it's valuable for us to try to hit every muscle throughout a week or a training cycle with a movement that does this, right? As long as we get one, we're good. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.